Hi there, and thank you for joining me on today's podcast, the Oikos Family Podcast. I'm Sonja Wood, and I'm going to be sharing Chapter 6 from Weed with an Ill Name with you today. And my goodness, this chapter actually really highlights why this little book is called Weed with an Ill Name. Because Uncle James, the uncle who is looking after George and Fanny, hears about his clover field having some weeds encroaching in it and causing quite a lot of destruction in his clover field. And he takes George and Fanny for a walk. And if you've been able to listen to Chapter 5 and Chapter 4 of this podcast series, you would have heard some stories about George's problem with pride and Fanny's problem with her temper. And Uncle James very wisely takes them for a walk and uses the example of the weeds in his clover field to teach them about how we need to pull the weeds out of our hearts, the weeds of destruction, the weeds with an ill name. It had such a profound impact on us, this particular chapter in this book, that it stayed with us as a family, and we can reference to it quite a bit by saying, oops, that's a weed with an ill name. That seems to be presenting itself in some characteristic. So it has really been a support and a help through the years of just being reminded of how we need to keep those weeds with ill names out of our hearts, how to do some weeding in our hearts and replace it. And sometimes that actually is a bit of a painful process, which is something that Uncle James touches on as he speaks with George and Fanny, his niece and nephew. But let me just leave this chapter with you now. It's chapter 6, and as I say, it will give a good overview of why this little book is called Weed with an Ill Name, and there's some very good lessons in it that can be a support to us. So I do hope you will find it as such, and that this will support you too. So thank you for joining me, and I hope you enjoy this chapter.
Chapter 6 The Clover Field. One morning, several weeks after Fanny and Susan had their big fight, the family was eating breakfast. One of the field workers came into the room to talk to Mr. Gray about some farm business. The hired man was just about to leave when he suddenly remembered something. He stopped at the door and said, "I almost forgot, sir, but have you looked at the 5-acre clover field lately?" "No, Reuben. The last time I saw it, it looked like it was doing well. Why do you ask?" "It looks good in some places," the man said. "But I went up that way last night. I thought it looked strange in some places out toward the middle of the field. I walked through it and looked. Sure enough, the weed has spread into it really bad." "The weed, Reuben? What weed?" "The weed with the ill name, sir. It is such an ugly word that I don't want to even say it. You know, the one. I mean, the one that we call by that short name around here. I don't know what its real name is." "Yes, Reuben, I know which one you mean. Are you sure it's growing in the clover?" "I'm positive, sir. I even saw it myself. It has grown so much that it has spread over several large areas." "Then that's the end of one of my clover crops, unless we can kill the enemy," Mr. Gray sighed. "I'm sorry, but I don't know if we could have done anything about it anyway. I'll go and look at it as soon as possible." "The weed with an ill name? What kind of a weed is that?" George Franklin asked his uncle when the man had left. By now, George had started to be a pretty good little farmer. He was always interested and curious about things that had to do with his uncle's land. "It is a very bad weed, George. It's very destructive and poisonous. It spreads very fast. You can come along with me right now. You can see the harm it has done and what it's doing now." In less than an hour, the farmer and his nephew were ready to walk out to the field. They just stepped out of the hall when Mr. Gray suddenly thought of something. He turned around and said, "Maybe Fanny would like to take a walk with us. It's a beautiful day for running in the meadows. Would you like to come along, Fanny?" Fanny always loved to go with her uncle as he went around the farm and did his work. In a few minutes she had put on her broad-brimmed hat and was ready to go. The 5-acre field was at the other end of Mr. Gray's farm. It lay right next to another farmer's land. Mr. Gray's neighbor could have learned some good things about farming from Mr. Gray, if he wanted to improve his farm. He didn't, and so the two farms always looked very different from each other. On Mr. Gray's side, the ditches and hedges were always neat and cared for. They prevented the land from being flooded when the men irrigated. Mr. Gray made sure that fertilizer was put on his crops every year so they would be healthy. The crops that were raised in his clover field were always strong and weed-free, unless something unexpected happened. This was the way Mr. Gray cared for his whole farm. On the other hand, Mr. Pearson was a careless, lazy farmer. Some of the dams had broken, and they were never fixed. Garbage filled his ditches. This made it very hard to irrigate and drain his fields properly. Many times, pools of swampy, stagnant water covered it. It was never fertilized either. It wasn't able to grow healthy crops. Weeds were a problem because no one took time to get rid of them. Even during a really good season, Mr. Pearson's crops were worth very little. We could write a lot more about the differences between Mr. Gray's and Mr. Pearson's farming. It would take us too long. Let's go back to George and Fanny Franklin. They were walking across the meadows and cornfields with their uncle, wondering about the weed with the ill name. Reuben told such a bad story about this. In less than half an hour, Mr. Gray and his young relatives reached the clover field. They could smell its sweet perfume drifting by in the gentle morning breeze. It was a pretty sight. The clover plants, healthy and tall, were blooming with red flowers. They looked beautiful up against the bright green clover. The delightful humming music of bees filled the air. Country people who pay attention to these things know how much busy little bees like a clover field covered with flowers. "There doesn't seem to be anything wrong here, does there, George?" the farmer said, after carefully looking across the whole field. "Well, I don't see anything wrong," George replied. Then he added honestly, "I don't know very much about that kind of thing, though." "What do you think, Fanny?" Mr. Gray continued. Fanny said she didn't know anything at all about clover and clover fields. She thought the flowers were very pretty and they smelled wonderful. "Do you see any of the weeds Reuben told you about, Uncle James?" "Not here, my boy, but I see something suspicious out there in the middle of the field. Let's go in and have a look." "Won't we hurt the clover if we walk on it?" asked Fanny. "We might hurt it a little, but we'll have to take that risk. Sometimes it's necessary to suffer a little damage in order to do what is good when we are trying to get to the root of evil things. That's the way it is with other things besides farming too." What does he mean? Fanny thought to herself. For instance, there are weeds that grow in the human heart. It's a good idea to reach them and, if possible, get rid of them, even if it's hard to do. Don't you think so, my dear? Said her uncle. Fanny said yes, at least she thought so. Sometimes when we are doing this, we come close to trampling down some of the finer, better feelings that are growing there. That is where we stern old folks who make ourselves teachers of babes are often wrong, I'm afraid. What does Uncle mean? Fanny wondered again. It wouldn't surprise me if he is thinking about me and my hot temper. I wonder, is Uncle James thinking about me and my pride? George whispered to himself. Mr. Gray went on talking as though he were just thinking out loud. There is only one perfect teacher who never makes this mistake. He is the great teacher who came from God. He never tramples down the good to get the bad. A bruised reed shall he not break, and the smoking flax shall he not quench. Isaiah 42:3. I'm sorry, I'm talking to you in parables. I didn't mean to do that. Well, anyway, Here we are now. Here's the weed. Fanny, even you can see something here that isn't like it should be, can't you?" While they were talking, Mr. Grey had been carefully walking through the clover. George and Fanny carefully followed him. Suddenly, they all stopped and looked. They had come to a spot in the middle of the field which looked very different from the part of the field they had just walked through. A small circle of clover was short and dried out. The red flowers were wilted, and the leaves and stems looked yellow. Fanny also thought she noticed an awful smell mixed in with the sweet perfume of the clover. There wasn't even one busy bee working in or anywhere near that circle. That wasn't all. Almost all the clover stems in front of them had thin, tough, mean-looking weeds twisted around them. The weeds had long, tough roots. They were spreading and covering the ground, and now the good plants were being choked to death. "Is that the weed Reuben meant?" Fanny asked. "Yes. It deserves to be called a weed with an ill name, doesn't it?" Fanny agreed. George was curious, and he asked what the short name was that Reuben had said sounded so ugly. Maybe Mr. Grey didn't hear his question, or maybe he didn't want to answer it just then. He just said, "I'm afraid we'll have to look around some more." Then he slowly went on, looking around him as he walked. "Oh dear, I thought so," he said, as they found a much bigger area of clover which had turned black and died. The weed, which was now growing very quickly, covered the ground in this place. The weeds here had also put out new shoots in every direction. They were beginning to take root in the soil. They were choking and killing all the clover plants around them. "See how the damage is spreading here?" Mr. Grey said. "Something must be done soon, or else the whole crop will be lost." "It smells so awful," Fanny said, and it was true. The decaying smell of the dead plants was quite sickening. As for the bees, they had clearly flown far away from that part of the field. The farmer was still looking at the damage done by the weed with an ill name. He just pulled up one of the weeds to show his nephew and niece. "See how deeply the roots have grown down into the soil, and how many there are?" Just then they heard a voice coming to them from across a nearby hedge. "So, Mr. Grey, you have some of it too, I see." George knew it was Mr. Pearson's voice. "Yes, I've got some of it, just like you say," answered the careful farmer. "See," the careless farmer taunted. "You can't keep the weeds out all the time, even with all your weeding and planning." "Yes, that's very true, my friend. Sometimes weeds will grow in spite of how careful we are," Mr. Grey told him. He felt like adding, "especially when we have such lazy farmers for neighbors." He didn't say that, though. Instead, he just asked his neighbor how his crop was doing. Mr. Pearson also had a clover field which was located on the other side of the hedge. "You should come take a look," Mr. Pearson invited. So Mr. Grey, George and Fanny went up to the hedge and looked over. One look was enough to convince them that the weed with an ill name had found a happy resting spot there, too. It was a sad sight. Half of the clover crop had already died. The weed had taken its place and was clearly spreading very quickly. "This is really bad," said the wiser farmer. "It looks like the damage has been going on here for quite a while." "I'll bet it has," replied the other. "What are you going to do, Mr. Pearson?" "What am I going to do? Nothing, of course. What's the use, anyway? It will cost more time, trouble, and money to get the weeds out of the ground than the crop I would save is worth. Who knows if I could save the crop anyway?" "If you had caught it in time, Mr. Pearson," Mr. Grey began. Mr. Pearson interrupted him rather impatiently. "For some reason I knew you would say that. I'm not sure what you say is true. It isn't quite that easy to get rid of the problem." "Well, we'll have to see, my friend. There's one thing I am sure of. Looking at it and talking about it will not do any good. It's time for me to get back to work. so I must say good-bye." Mr. Pearson said a friendly good-bye too. Then Mr. Grey walked home with his nephew and niece.